The secret was never buried. It was federal. They say the first scream never left her lungs. That when they opened the walls of the Greybriar estate in 1903, what they found inside wasn't a body, it was a room. A hidden nursery sealed in brick. No windows, no doors. Just faded wallpaper of black geese and red thread clawed into the floorboards. There were toys too. Wooden, handmade, notched with teeth marks. And one name carved again and again into the plaster. Selma. But here's what they didn't publish in the paper. The estate ledger showed no record of a Selma. No birth, no wet nurse, no death. Just a blank year. 1879, a year when every clock in the Greybriar house had its hour hand snapped off. The servants whispered about that year, if they whispered at all. One wrote a note in the margins of a hymnal, she speaks in chimes. Do not hum indoors. That same hymnal was found decades later in the attic, soaked through and warped into a spiral. As if water hadn't fallen on it, but risen from inside. The Greybriar family was never charged, never questioned. Because they weren't like other families. They were founders. Patrons. Owners of blood and land and law. Their portraits hung in courthouse halls, eyes the color of soot. One of them, Joseph Greybriar, wrote legal codes still used in the state today. Another, Miriam Greybriar, funded the asylum on Harrow Hill, where patients were forbidden to speak between dusk and dawn. That's how it always starts. With silence. Not the quiet of peace, but the hush of power. The kind of silence that watches, that listens, that waits. Selma, they said, was a mercy. An accident. A rumor. But the wallpaper told another story. Scratched deep into the geese were tiny mouths. Open. Screaming. And when the renovation team pried up the floorboards, they found 9 fingernails, pressed into the wood like runes. No fingerprints. Just heat marks. One worker swore he heard a music box begin to play, though no box was ever found. He never returned to the site. He went blind a week later. Both retinas, scorched from within. The doctor called it spontaneous ocular failure. But the man? He called it something else, she's learning to look back. This isn't just a haunted house. This is a bloodline that never let go of its dead. And now, it's remembering. Dogwood was only the beginning. And the blood never dried. Before the Caraways. Before Greybriar. There was the Cain-Holt line. Not a family in the ordinary sense, but a lineage marked by silence, possession, and a vow made in a burning chapel in 1721, when 13 bodies were found nailed upright to the pews, facing backward, mouths sewn shut with cattail reed. The land they claimed wasn't bought. It was taken. And not from other men, but from what the locals once called the breathless ones, entities said to walk before wind was born, whose names couldn't be spoken without frost forming on the tongue. Every Cain-Holt child was made to kneel in the black soil of Northfield and listen to the ground until they could hear it breathe back. That was their right. Not baptism. Not birthright. Listening. The last known Cain-Holt descendant was a girl named Temperance. She was born without eyes. Just smooth lids that twitched at sound. They kept her in the cellar of the home until age 12, fed only boiled eggs and salted roots. Her hair was cut monthly and buried near the well. They said she could tell when someone was lying just by smelling the air behind them. And when the livestock turned inside out one winter, their organs arranged in spirals with poppies blooming from the ribcages, Temperance wept. Not out of fear, but mourning. She said something old had been stirred. And it was coming. One night, the entire Cain-Holt house disappeared. Not collapsed. Not burned. Gone. No ruins. No ash. Just a field of bent wheat in a perfect spiral, 12 turns wide, where no birds ever landed again. Farmers who passed the edge of it said their skin broke out in welts shaped like fingerprints. One boy crossed it on a dare and returned barefoot, sobbing, hands covered in someone else's blood. When investigators arrived, they found 13 handprints on the old root cellar door, seared in like brands. Each a different size. One was small enough to belong to a newborn. No Cainholt was ever seen again. But years later, at the First Chapel orphanage, a mute girl arrived. Her name was Emery. Her palms were covered in soil. And she carried nothing but a bundle of cattail reeds, tied in 12 knots. They say she never cried. She just kept humming, a song no one taught her. One nurse said it sounded like a lullaby sung in reverse. She didn't have a last name on record. But if you pried open her prayer book, it was written there. Cainholt. In blood, some families inherit fortune. Others inherit the debt of the dead. The Thatchers of Ellistone were once considered pioneers, God-fearing builders of railroads and progress. But their legacy was not written in stone. It was buried beneath it. In 1857, when the eastern line of the Bone River Railroad was being carved through limestone and marsh, a Thatcher foreman ordered the excavation of a wide trench near Black Hollow Ridge. He ignored the warnings of local tribal elders, who had marked the land with carved stakes and ash circles. They said it was a sleeper ground, where voices echoed even when no one spoke. The dig took only 3 days. The consequences lasted generations. The workers uncovered a bed of skulls, small, smooth, human, but with no mandibles. Just the top halves, hollowed like bowls, stacked in groups of 6, each with a wax seal beneath it. The seals bore the same mark that later appeared on Thatcher family land deeds, a needle threaded through an eye. They reburied the remains quietly. But that night, the air changed. Witnesses reported the scent of wet iron and burnt sugar drifting over the camp. Then came the voices. Not in English. Not in any known tongue. But in tones that made the ears ring and eyes water. The first man to hear them clawed out his own eardrums with a railway spike. Thatcher's solution was brutal. He paid triple wages and threatened silence with blood. But the damage was done. Of the 50 men who worked that trench, only 4 lived past the next winter. One drowned in a bathtub filled with salt. Another was found outside town, buried up to his chin in black soil, teeth missing. The other 2 were admitted to the Harrow Hill Asylum, repeating the same line over and over, "They see from under." Decades later, the Thatcher estate began to fracture. Children born with teeth. Mirrors that refused to reflect their faces. One daughter, Margeline, was photographed at age 6, but in the developed image, her eyes were stitched closed, though she'd been wide awake when the shutter clicked. Her mother slit her own throat 3 nights later, but not before scrawling a single phrase in flour across the kitchen floor, "The mouths beneath remember." That phrase appeared again in 1919, carved into the inside of a steel coffin meant for a Thatcher heir who died of nervous collapse. His body, when exhumed by order of the county, was missing its tongue. The coffin was sealed from the inside. This family was never cursed. They were collected. And what they unearthed was not history, but hunger. The oldest blood doesn't run, it coils. In the mountains beyond Black Hollow, past where the maps end in jagged ink and guesswork, stood the Wexler homestead, not a manor, not a farm, but something older. Older than law, older than roads. It was built without blueprints, without nails. Every beam bound by braided vines and sinew, every window shaped in uneven hexagons. The house itself seemed to lean away from the sun. They called it the listening house. Not because it echoed, but because it never answered. The Wexlers were not known for hospitality. They were known for longevity. 6 generations, no deaths under 70. No visible illness. No graves. And no photographs. Not one image of a Wexler exists before 1961. Though records claim they attended council meetings, sold goods, paid tax, their faces remained a blank. As if the air refused to trap their likeness. One census taker wrote, in frantic pencil, "The eldest daughter stared directly into me. Her mouth didn't move. But I heard her say, 'Not yet.' I left my shoes behind. I don't remember why." His body was found weeks later, 20 miles east. His feet bare, rotted. His tongue swollen black, bitten clean through. The Wexlers didn't grieve. Because grief implies loss. And the Wexlers didn't lose anything. It said they carried blood not of this soil. Not alien in a spacefaring sense, but alien to time. The women bore children only in odd years. The men only spoke in pairs, never alone. And in the attic, according to one escaped visitor, was a cradle that rocked by itself, even when the windows were shut and the air stood dead. In 1944, a fire swept through Ellistone. A full third of the town gone in smoke. And yet the Wexler home remained untouched, not a scorch, not a cinder. When firemen approached, their engine sputtered out at the gate, as if the road behind them had closed. What lived inside that house wasn't merely a family. It was a waiting. A patience so dense it changed the gravity around it. Clocks ticked slower in the parlor. Bread refused to mold. Blood stayed bright, even days after death. If death ever truly came. A journal belonging to a traveling preacher was found near the property line in 1956. The final page read, "They never sleep. They watch in shifts." And beneath that, in ink darker than any pen could draw, I dreamed of their teeth. Not in their mouths. In mine. The Wexlers still aren't dead. They're counting down, you don't haunt a place like this. It haunts you to find its way back. There's a town that no longer appears on maps. Not because it vanished, but because it was removed. Its name was Bellwether. Founded 1808. Abandoned 1891. And if you dig deep enough in the archived church ledgers, in the brittle margins of burned township registries, you'll find this note scrawled beside its name in red, "Do not redraw." Bound by the old inheritance. Bellwether wasn't built on cursed land. It was built to contain something. A shape. A hunger. An echo that wanted a name. And the Langford family? They gave it one. Jonas Langford was a devout man. A bricklayer. But what he built beneath the town wasn't a cellar. It was a chamber. A dome of limestone, sealed in whale oil and lined with copper plates carved in runes so old they predate Hebrew. He claimed he heard it speak to him during a fever, not in words, but in patterns. A throb behind the ear. A knock inside the lungs. A rhythm that whispered, "I remember being whole." His wife gave birth to a son 3 months early. Perfectly formed. Eyes already open. The Langfords held midnight gatherings beneath the town chapel. A harmonic correction, they called it. Only one record remains, the testimony of a gravedigger named Hune Talbot, who quit his post the next morning after seeing a child levitating inside a copper circle, humming in a voice deeper than mine. He hung himself a week later, but not before carving into his wall, "The child is just the vessel. The voice is what's real." Soon after, Bellwether changed. Mirrors clouded over when held too long. Dogs wailed before sundown. Children born without fingernails would whisper to corners and dig into the hearth ash, saying they were looking for the door. The Langfords never denied it. They encouraged it. They said it was their gift to the world. And then came the night without names. 18 families gone by morning. Doors wide open. Beds untouched. Tables still set. Not a drop of blood. Not a single footprint in the frost. But every mirror in town. Cracked down the center. As if from the inside. Jonas Langford was found standing in the chapel, his mouth torn open at the sides. A perfect smile. No lips left. Just teeth and teeth and teeth. Pinned to his chest was a note in rust, "I am made of memory. And I am still hungry." They burned the town from the map. But Bellwether's not gone. It's just, waiting for a new mouth. Not all ghosts want to be seen. Some want to be remembered wrong. The Dellinger family of Northvale held a legacy no one questioned, at least, not to their faces. Old money, older rules. They owned the paper mill, the grain elevator, even the water rights. But they also owned something else. Something no one talked about in daylight, the archive room. Not a library. Not a museum. A locked wing in their estate. No doorknob. No hinges. Just a square of wall smooth as wax, sealed in soot. And every generation, one child was chosen to enter it. They called it the naming. The last known Dellinger boy, Isaac, was sent in at age 10. His hair was shaved. His clothes burned. He was blindfolded and walked backward through the halls by candlelight. The ceremony was silent. No priest. No witness. Only a bell tolling once from the basement furnace, and then, the door vanished behind him. He returned 3 days later. Eyes red as coals. Lips cracked. And he would not speak his own name again. When asked what he saw inside, he smiled and said, "I didn't see. I was seen." After that, things began to rot, but only subtly. Dogs wouldn't go near the estate. The mill turned out paper already yellowed and damp. The river beneath their land ran backwards for a full week, against current and gravity. No explanation was ever offered. But the worst part? The portraits. Each wall of the manor had paintings, all Dellinger ancestors, stretching back to the early 1700s. But one by one, the faces changed. Not repainted. Not defaced. Changed. Their eyes darkened. Their mouths warped. One bore 2 rows of teeth by winter. Another had no mouth at all. The staff noticed first, then visitors. By the time the gallery was sealed, only one painting still looked human. Isaac's. And his smile? It was spreading. From canvas to wall. From frame to floorboards. His mother hung herself from the 3rd-floor landing after she claimed to see him blink, in the painting. When police arrived, the archive wall was open. Empty. But burned into the floor was a child's handprint, wrapped in a spiral of names, none of them Dellinger. All of them real. Every name belonged to a child missing from other towns. Decades apart. Miles away. No blood. No bodies. Just memory, repainted. You don't forget a Dellinger. You just remember them wrong. The dead don't always knock. Sometimes, they whisper through the ones you trust most. In the swampy outlands of East Briar Patch, there stood a house with no road to it. No one built it. No one sold it. It was simply, there. Crooked chimney. Red shingles like dried flesh. Porch steps that sank when it hadn't rained in weeks. The locals called it the Spindle House. And the family inside? The Roaches. Not by name, by nature. The patriarch, Callum Roach, filed no taxes. Carried no papers. No one knew where he'd come from, but he owned 40 acres of land that never grew anything and a well that never ran dry. It was said if you dropped a coin into that well, it didn't make a sound. Just vanished. And that sometimes, if you leaned close enough, it spat something back. In 1927, a census taker tried to record the Roach family. He visited the house, notebook in hand, and was never seen again. When a deputy went to investigate, all he found was a field of shoes, dozens of them, left in pairs, all pointing toward the house. The deputy turned and walked straight into the swamp. His body was never recovered, but his notebook floated up 3 days later. Inside it read, they move under your skin when you're not looking. The townsfolk never approached again. But children would sometimes vanish for a night, only to return with mud in their mouths and stitching behind their ears, tiny black thread, tight as if pulled from inside. When asked where they'd been, each child answered the same thing, visiting cousins. But no roach children were ever seen outside. No lights in the house. No smoke from the chimney. Yet, the house was always warm when touched. And if you pressed your ear against the wood, you could hear them breathing, all of them, like a nest. And then there were the letters. Typed. Delivered to random doorsteps across the county. Each addressed with the name of someone long dead. Each stamped with a black centipede instead of postage. The letters were filled with memories no one should have had. Regrets. Lies never confessed. Secrets whispered to no one. The sheriff burned every one. But in the weeks after, his wife miscarried. His dog died. His dreams turned to teeth. He hanged himself in his barn after carving into the wall, "I know what I am now. And it's too late to crawl back." The spindle house still stands. No moss grows on it. No birds land near it. And if you say the name, Roach, in a mirror at dusk, you'll hear crawling behind your eyes. Sometimes the curse isn't the house. Sometimes, it's the name that builds it. In the northern valley where fog sinks low and the soil bleeds rust, there was a family so old, their surname is now a direction. The Wittershins. They weren't aristocrats. They weren't clergy. They were something far more permanent, pattern keepers. Their ancestors were known not for what they ruled, but for what they remembered. Secrets of soil. Of timing. Of doors that don't open with keys, but with sacrifice. Their home was a circle of 7 cabins, built facing away from one another, each with only one window. And in the center, a fire pit that never went cold, even in snow. It was said that every generation birthed one reversal. A child born walking backwards. Literally. One heel never facing forward, the spine misaligned as if being pulled by something behind the veil. They treated these children not as cursed, but as conductors. In 1884, a missionary family attempted to convert the Wittershins. They were met with hospitality. Bread. Salt. Smiles. They never left. 2 months later, their carriage was found capsized in the river with no bodies inside, only wax dolls arranged in prayer, mouths stuffed with pine needles. When authorities searched the Wittershins' grounds, they found no graves. Just rings. Perfect circles of ash and shattered bone, 22 of them, each 10 feet wide, with markings only visible beneath black powder. Every ring was aligned with a celestial event. Every one tied to a missing person. The family claimed ignorance. Just old traditions, they said. But the sheriff's horse refused to step near the 7th ring. It collapsed on sight, eyes bled out. That was when the youngest Wittershin's daughter stepped forward. Age 7. Pale. Bald. She handed the sheriff a bundle of straw shaped like a man and said only, "This is the one who asked questions." The sheriff quit the next day. Went south. Never spoke again. And then the town changed. Roosters crowed at dusk. The river flowed uphill on full moons. Pregnant women began giving birth early, always 7 weeks premature, always at the stroke of midnight. The babies didn't cry. They just watched. The Wittershins were never arrested. Never expelled. Because everyone who tried, they vanished. And their names reappeared months later, not on gravestones, but in the family tree, etched into bark, as if they'd always belonged. Some families carry history. The Wittershins rewrite it. Some bloodlines don't fade. They camouflage. In the southern woods beyond Cinder Lake, past the railroad that was never finished, sits a ruin of a mansion long swallowed by moss and time. But if you step close enough, you'll see something that shouldn't be there, curtains still swaying. As if someone just let them go. This was the Holloway house. Built in 1810 by Josiah Holloway, a man who never showed up in a single daguerreotype, though he hosted dozens of guests, all of whom eventually disappeared from public record. Every single one. It said Josiah Holloway never aged. The portraits changed, yes. But the man in them? Same sharp cheekbones. Same ring on the left hand. And always, the same eyes, coal glass black, with no light in them at all. The Holloways had rules. You never entered the cellar. You never stayed past sunset. And you never accepted their invitation, handwritten in blue ink and sealed with bone wax. But the real story didn't begin until 1852, when a Holloway child was born without a shadow. They named her Liza. She didn't walk until age 6. Didn't speak until 9. But when she finally did, she whispered her first words to the chimney, "He's still burning. Let him finish." After that, the air in the house changed. Mirrors melted. Birds crashed into windows that weren't there. Every guest room began to grow smaller, as if the house were slowly devouring itself. And yet the family stayed. Because the Holloways believed in containment. They weren't cursed. They were custodians. The house was never meant to be a home. It was a vault. What they had locked beneath the hearth wasn't a spirit or a demon. It was something older. Something that fed on remembrance. And every year, on the equinox, the Holloways held a ritual dinner. No food. Just plates of ash. Every guest forced to speak the name of someone they'd forgotten. If they couldn't, they were given to the house. One maid, Sarah Lee, fled the mansion one night and collapsed in town, her hands fused together by some glue that smelled of burnt lilac and teeth. She screamed only one word before dying of shock: inheritance. No bodies were buried in the Holloway graveyard, just blank stones, and the symbol of a mouth with the tongue cut out. To this day, travelers near Cinder Lake report dreams of doors that lead back to the mansion. Doors with your own name carved above them. Don't open it. Because if the Holloways are calling, they're not inviting you. They're remembering you. The worst kind of haunting is the one that waits inside your own blood. In the dead hills of Vermilion Parish, where nothing grows straight and the winds turn inward like breath reversing, there lived the Cray family, midwives, scribes, and oath-keepers of the ancient kind. They were not feared because they practiced sorcery. They were feared because they remembered the cost of forgetting. Their home sat half buried in the shale, with only one chimney ever lit. They never used light, only oil, and never allowed their children to look into mirrors before the age of 12. If they did, the reflection didn't stop when they moved. And one time, it smiled first. The Crays kept records. But not names, not dates, deeds. Every sin, every secret, scratched into wax tablets, sealed in linen, and buried with the eldest daughter's bones. They called them remnants. And it was said if you held one too long, you'd forget who you were before. In 1911, a traveling archivist named Peter Morland was granted rare access to the Cray household after claiming to be a descendant. He was allowed to stay one night. At sunrise, he walked out barefoot, holding one of the wax remnants, whispering the same word again and again, "Mine." He vanished into the woods and was never seen again. But the Crays made room for another chair at the table that week. As if he'd come home. That was the year the stillbirths began. Not dead. Not alive. Hollow. Babies born without eyes, with ribs wrapped backward, some with parchment instead of skin. Each time, a Cray was present. Each time, they said the same phrase to the mothers: "You kept what was not yours." Locals accused them of witchcraft. But no formal charges were ever filed. Why? Because every judge who tried suffered the same fate, their own children forgot them. One father returned home to find his daughter staring out the window at the Cray house, asking, "Who are you?" She never spoke to him again. And in the attic of the Cray estate, a mural, painted in blood and smoke, stretching across the full width of the room. It depicted a tree, roots made of hands, branches of screaming mouths. At the base, etched in hundreds of tiny scratches, was a message: "We remember so you don't have to. But if you forget us, we will come for what was buried." Halfway through this descent, we ask something rare, something binding. Not every family heirloom is jewelry. Some are doorways. In a scorched stretch of Dakota Plain, just west of where the sun seems to stall, sits the collapsed remains of the Blackstone homestead. A place where compasses spin, watches stop, and men forget what they came looking for. They were once cattle barons. 5 sons. 1 blind daughter. The Blackstones made their fortune by controlling routes no one else dared ride, because they didn't follow maps. They followed something older. Lines in the dust. Patterns of bone. Footpaths that appeared only under moonlight. They called them inheritance trails. And they claimed they had the right to walk them because their family earned it through blood and burial. The secret? The Blackstones weren't interested in where the trails led. Only in what followed them back. In 1889, a writer named Ellis Boone arrived in town raving about a fire that whispered, claiming he'd ridden one of the inheritance trails. He had no skin left on his hands, his boots filled with teeth, and he kept asking, "Which of you called it? Which of you gave it my name?" He died at dawn, eyes wide, staring at the eastern ridge. But that night, the youngest Blackstone son, Silas, lit a lantern and walked into the hills barefoot. When he returned, he'd aged 10 years. And he brought something back. Not a beast. Not a ghost. A mirror. Covered in cloth. Ringed in salt. They kept it in the parlor, where no one spoke above a whisper. It was never cleaned. Never faced directly. And no one, was allowed to look into it on their birthday. Because when you did, you saw yourself, yes. But a little bit earlier. A you that hadn't happened yet. And the further you stared, the less it looked like you at all. One cousin vanished after claiming the mirror spoke his name before he did. His room was found empty, but the pillow had 2 perfect impressions, as if someone had been lying beside him, waiting. Eventually, the Blackstones tried to bury the mirror. But the next morning, it was hanging from the barn rafters, dripping. Not with blood. With milk. No cows had been milked. No one knew what it meant. But every animal on the farm was pregnant the next day. Even the bulls. The homestead collapsed during a blue storm in 1904. Lightning struck the mirror. But it didn't break. It simply reflected nothing. And that, they say, was the last truth the Blackstones ever saw. When blood remembers what the mind forgets, the house becomes a mouth. In the northern thickets of Winthrop Hollow, where bark peels like skin and the trees lean inward instead of up, there once stood a white house with no door on the front. Just a frame. Just a welcome mat that read, "You've already been here." They called it the Miravalli House. But no one remembered why. The Miravalli family were archivists of a different kind. They didn't write books. They bound them. With flesh. With hair. With names spoken only once, then swallowed. Each child born to a Miravalli was given 2 things, a stitched-shut journal, and a spoon made of bone. The spoon was not for eating. It was for digging. Because beneath the house, under 6 feet of black clay, lay the family's most sacred room, the table of undone things. It wasn't a dining table. It was a ledger. A map of every choice not taken, every thought suppressed, every word unsaid, carved into the table's underside in jagged, wet script. Visitors to the home reported hearing footsteps in reverse. Clocks ticked toward midnight, no matter the hour. Reflections showed bruises that hadn't happened yet. And in the sitting room stood an armchair that no one ever touched. Not because it was cursed, but because it was occupied. Even when empty. If someone sat in it, they didn't get up. Not really. Their body did. But not their will. One housemaid said she saw the youngest Miravalli boy, Evan, sit there one dusk with a candied fig and a grin. He stood up smiling. But for the rest of his life, he referred to himself in third person. And whenever asked what happened that day, he'd reply, he needed a body. I said yes. Neighbors eventually stopped visiting. Pets wouldn't cross the path. Bees hovered above the roof in clusters, unmoving, like waiting eyes. Then, in 1893, every single mirror in Winthrop Hollow shattered at once. Every clock stopped. And every house that had ever accepted a Miravalli guest found something scrawled beneath its doormat, I left something here. I will return for it. No one could explain it. But the children of those homes, they started sleepwalking. To the woods. To the old Miravalli lot. Digging. Not for gold. Not for bones. For the journal they'd never written, but somehow still remembered. The Miravales didn't vanish. They archived themselves. Now the hollow is quieter. But the trees? They lean in deeper. Because they're still listening. And they never forget what was buried with your name still breathing. Some families bury their past. Others, raise it by name. The Gallowin family of eastern Massachusetts never owned much. No land, no fortune, no titles. What they possessed instead was permission. The kind no one grants anymore. The kind you inherit by whisper, not by will. They were bell raisers. In the old tongue, that meant something different than it does now. It didn't mean they rang bells. It meant they summoned them. Bells that toll without ropes. Bells that cry through iron. Bells that only ring when something crosses over. And Gallowin blood knew how to make them ring. Their home, a slate-gray colonial surrounded by dead apple trees, had no wind chimes, only hung bones. Vertebrae. Small. Not animal. Bleached and knotted in red twine, they clicked in rhythm when fog came down. One beat. Then two. Then silence. It was never random. Each beat meant a name was being remembered. Not fondly. Not freely. But forcibly. Like a fist pounding through time. The Gallowins didn't speak much in town. But when they did, it was always in echo. Like they were repeating something they hadn't said yet. And every generation birthed one child with a broken voice, not mute, but backward. Every word they spoke came out in reverse. One such child, Mercy Gallowin, began carving her dreams into the attic walls. Symbols no one understood. Circles within mouths. Eyes inside trees. Every carving matched an unknown sigil etched into headstones found beneath the nearby church. Headstones no one had ever noticed before. No burial records. No names. Just dates. All the same day. October 31st, 1731. The night the first bell rang in Gallowin House. A bell made of fused ribs and bound iron, sealed with teeth from those who died with secrets. It told not when someone died, but when they were called back. The sound didn't travel by air. It traveled through memory. And once you heard it, you could never stop hearing it. That's what happened to the town magistrate, who tried to remove the family in 1906. Claimed their rituals violated public order. 3 days later, he walked into the woods barefoot and dug his own grave. They found him buried upside down, mouth full of ashes. On his chest, a wax medallion bearing the Gallowin sigil. And around his grave, 7 small bells, still ringing. The Gallowins don't keep ghosts. They keep the right to return them. And if you ever hear a bell ring with no wind, check your memories. Something may be climbing out. Time doesn't heal in some houses. It feeds. And the family it answers to never leaves the table. In the frozen rim of Stillwater County sits a farmhouse where snow doesn't melt. Even in summer. Even when touched. Even when it turns red. The Evermarch family lived there. Not by accident, and certainly not by chance. They were descendants of a line erased from all census rolls, all church registries, even old land deeds. But they didn't hide. They anchored. The Evermarches believed in the weight of time, not as history, but as a being. Something that walks. Watches. Waits. They didn't record dates. They fed them. Literally. Every year, on the exact moment of the first frost, the Evermarch table was set with 12 places. No matter how many family members were alive, the table remained full. And each plate bore a name that hadn't yet been spoken. Names from future blood. Babies not born. People not yet conceived. But the food would vanish. Forks would move. Wine would drain, as if someone invisible, and inevitable, had come home early. And the cost of skipping dinner? Unbirth. One child, Julian Evermarch, was never seen after missing the meal in 1903. His mother found his bed still warm. But his photographs had gone blank. Letters he wrote became gibberish. And worst of all, no one remembered what he looked like. Not even her. That was the year the clocks in the house began spinning counterclockwise. The rooster crowed before the sun. And the moon rose twice. Stranger still, the youngest daughter, Evelyn, began aging backwards, teeth falling back into her gums, hair darkening, words reducing to grunts, then coos, then silence. When she was finally buried, the tombstone read, Evelyn Evermarch, born eventually. Died previously. Visitors to the home felt time skip around them. Enter in the morning, leave before sunset, but return to find 3 days had passed. One traveler claimed he saw his own footprints entering the house before he arrived. The Evermarches didn't mourn death. They prepaid it. They believed time was a contract, and every child born owed minutes, hours, lifetimes, to an account none of them opened, but all of them signed. That's why their house still stands. Frozen in place. Unrotted. Untouched. Because the Evermarches didn't build a legacy. They built a loop. And if you find yourself dreaming of snow in July, you may have sat at that table before. Or worse. You will. Some roots feed the tree. Others feed on what's buried beneath it. In the deep basin woods behind the abandoned township of Lantern Hollow, there stands no house, no fence, no barn. Just a single gnarled black tree, 20 feet tall, petrified from root to crown, bark veined with iron, and its branches shaped like reaching arms. It was said to be planted by the Caroway family, a bloodline older than the land itself. They didn't come to America. They were already here, before borders, before ink touched maps, before names were needed. The Calrows were not a family in the traditional sense. They were called a lineage of soil keepers. Their claim to the land wasn't by deed, but by burial. They believed that once a body entered the earth, the land remembered it, not with grief, but with hunger. And every Calrow child was taught to whisper their name into the soil before they slept. So if death came early, the ground would know who to keep. In 1855, a geologist named Ezra Blaine came to survey the basin. He took samples of the black soil beneath the Calrow tree. Claimed it hummed in his palm and vibrated against his heartbeat. He left 3 days later, bleeding from his fingernails and muttering only, "It's not a tree. It's a throat." He was never seen again, but his journal was recovered from the roots weeks later. The pages had fused, the ink rearranged into spiral text patterns resembling family trees with no names, only sounds. One Calrow, Esther, was said to have returned from the grave. Not as a ghost, but as herself. Woke up under her own gravestone. Eyes black as loam. Tongue forked. She walked straight to the tree, touched its trunk, and whispered something none could hear. The next morning, 3 townspeople were found buried upright. Soil packed into their mouths. Eyes open. Smiling. After that, the Carrows stopped appearing in town. But strange flowers bloomed in every yard connected to their bloodline. Thick black petals. Roots that moved on their own when cut. And if you set them on fire, they screamed. Old papers speak of a funeral rite the Carrows practiced in secret. Not a burial. A planting. The dead weren't lowered, they were offered. Returned not to rest, but to become part of the rootwork. Flesh turned to memory. Memory turned to tendrils. It said the black tree still grows. But not upward. Downward. Deeper into the bones of a forgotten country. And if you stand near it long enough, you'll feel it humming. And you'll wonder if the earth already knows your name. Every bloodline carries a debt. The oldest families never pay with money. In the sunken township of Ashfern Bend, built along a bend in the river that never ran dry, even in drought, lived the Moors, a family whispered about but never confronted. They were ledger keepers of the soul, inheritors not of wealth, but of unsettled pacts. Their home was made entirely of blackened cedar, windows tinted not with glass but pressed ash. No photographs existed of its interior, and no visitor ever recalled the same layout twice. The house rearranged itself depending on the name you entered with. They called it the House of Do Things. The Moors weren't doctors. Weren't priests. They were collectors. The family carried books, massive tomes bound in eelskin, locked with red clasps. Inside were not accounts or scriptures but names. Not just of the living, but the unfinished. These were people who had escaped something, grief, guilt, punishment, even fate itself. But the Moors, they found them. And they didn't kill. They balanced. One tale speaks of a young man named Elric Wren who tried to burn down the Moor estate after his sister vanished inside. The fire rose high, but did not consume. When he fled, he found himself back at the front gate, barefoot, holding a doll he hadn't seen since childhood. The grass around him had wilted. The road behind him, gone. They say Elric lives still. In the house. Opening doors for others. But the most chilling of Moor practices came during their night of balance, a family-only ritual held once every 13 years. On that night, one child, always the youngest, was blindfolded and told to choose a name from the ledger at random. Whoever was chosen was visited. Not for punishment, but for collection. And once taken, their name was blotted in wax. No longer part of this world. Not dead. Not living. Just, settled. A Moor daughter once explained it like this to a parish priest: people think hell is below. But it isn't. Hell is unpaid debt. And we're just the ones holding the receipt. The priest left the church a week later and was never seen again. But a candle lit itself in the chapel each night for years afterward. Always at the same hour. Always the same color, gray. And in the logbook, his name had been crossed out in ink. Then carved back in. But not by any human hand. Some families don't grow older, they grow in reverse. In the high timber ridges of old Sycamore Reach, where birds don't sing and snow never touches the trees, lived the Thoreaus, a family cursed not by witchcraft or sin, but by memory. They were known as time-bearers. Because time didn't carry them forward. It coiled around them, like a serpent eating its own birth. Their children were born wrinkled. Their elders, smooth-skinned and unblinking. One could not tell who was mother and who was daughter. Because the Thoreaus aged backward. Not metaphorically. Literally. The day of their birth was the oldest they would ever look. And from that moment, the clock unwound. They lived in a house called the Knowing, no doors, just archways. No clocks, just mirrors hung in the ceiling so they could see what time tried to take away. Their patriarch, Elias Theroux, was said to be born at 97, with cataracts, loose teeth, and a voice like gravel. By the time he was 40, he could outrun the wind and speak languages no one taught him. He died at the age of 6 months, smiling, cradled in his great-grandson's arms. The world never understood them. So they isolated. And the forest obeyed. Birdsong stopped 300 feet from their porch. Wolves circled, but never entered. And children who wandered too close came home with memories they'd never lived. One girl, Annie Frey, claimed she saw her own funeral in the trees. A pine box, her face inside. She described a hymn no one had ever taught her, and for a week after, she spoke in a voice 30 years older than her throat. But the Therouxs never denied what they were. In fact, they celebrated their unbirthdays, moments when a family member forgot how to speak, or how to read, or how to hurt. These were considered sacred. Because forgetting was a kind of freedom. Until one child broke the cycle. A boy named March Theroux, born too young, too fast. His eyes were already bright, already watching, already remembering things no one should remember. He did not regress. He aged forward. A sin, in their eyes. They tried to hide him in the attic, a space where time stood still. But one day, he left. Walked into town barefoot. Smiling. Holding a journal made of mirror glass. On the first page was written, "Time is not a line. It is a lie. And my family, is the proof." He was never seen again. But now, people in Old Sycamore Reach say if you stand near a mirror at dusk, your reflection might look just a little bit older than you remember. Some families don't leave behind legacies. They leave behind locations. In the drowned basin of Marrow's Wake, where the fog never lifts and the river runs the color of teeth, there are no gravestones. No markers. No names carved in stone. Because the Drellick family didn't bury their dead. They built with them. The Drellicks were a dynasty of masons, not by trade, but by vow. Generations of them carved their lineage into the land, brick by brick, bone by bone. Every wall laid by hand. Every joint sealed not with mortar, but with powdered jawbone and salt. Their family estate, known only as the Threshold, was never mapped. Because it shifted. Every year, new rooms appeared. Old ones vanished. Guests entered parlors that turned into basements. Kitchens that became crypts. It was said that if a Drellick died in a room, that room absorbed their presence. And the next time you stepped inside, it would know your name. The Drellicks believed houses were containers, not for people, but for promises. And they promised each other eternity. But not in heaven. In structure. One son, Alder Drellick, once confessed to a schoolteacher that his grandmother lived between the walls. Not metaphorically. Literally. He said he could hear her breathing. Singing. Weeping. Watching him sleep. When workers tried to tear down part of the threshold in 1911 for repairs, they found vertebrae in the support beams. Not buried. Built in. But no charges were filed. No bodies exhumed. Because the sheriff who led the inspection disappeared inside the East Wing. And when his deputy went in after him, he came out 20 years older. Hair white. Knees shaking. Voice hoarse from screaming a name no one could understand. They sealed the place after that. But the Drellicks didn't protest. They were already part of it. People say the house still shifts at night. Windows breathing. Floors sighing. Sometimes, you can see lights flickering in the windows, not candlelight, not electric. A kind of glow older than flame, as if the walls themselves are remembering. And in the woods behind the estate, a single stone table. No carvings. No offerings. Just a single phrase, etched so faintly it can only be read at twilight: we did not die. We became. And if you knock on the side of the house 3 times in a row, they say it knocks back. But only if it recognizes you. When a family survives long enough, it stops being remembered, and starts being worshipped. In the sulphur-tinged hills of Gravenmore, where the grass grows in patterns and the rain falls without clouds, the locals don't speak the name Vanek. They chant it. Not aloud. But under breath. In sleep. In dreams they don't remember having. The Vaneks were never seen in daylight. Not once. Every photograph taken of their estate, known only as the Holler of Ash, showed the same thing: a house with no shadow. Trees bent away from it. A sky directly above it, empty. They were said to be dream-blooded. A family line born from a union older than man, between waking and memory. No birth certificates. No records of marriage. No deaths ever filed. But people remembered them. Not from experience, but from sleep. Because the Vaneks were believed to be the source of visitation, a concept once banned by the Eastern Chapel in 1742. It stated that certain families did not descend from people, but from thoughts strong enough to become flesh. And once a Vanek child was born, it didn't take a breath. It took a name. Someone nearby would forget their own. Forget who they were. Forget they'd ever been. One teacher in Gravenmore awoke to find every journal in her classroom filled with the same symbol, a spiraled sun with teeth. Drawn by every student. Simultaneously. None of them remembered doing it. She left town that night. Never spoke again. The Vaneks were never violent. But veneration is its own form of violence. Because once a family is believed in, they don't need to ask permission anymore. They move through sleep. Through bloodlines. Through longing. In 1890, a census taker went door to door in Gravenmore and was confused to find every household had a room with no door. Just a frame. A cold draft. And a plate of food, untouched, but always warm. When he asked, each family answered the same thing: that's for the Vaneks. They visit when we forget we're awake. The census taker's notes were never published. But in the margin of his final page, written in red pencil, were 4 words: I think I dreamed them. And when they later found his body, it was asleep. Eyes closed. Heart still. Mouth smiling. Above his bed, a spiral. And the faint scent of ash. Most curses are about death. This one is about being erased, while still alive. In the mist-swallowed pines of Belgrave Hollow, there is a house no map dares mark, and no postman ever reaches. Because to find it, you must already know it. It belongs to the Elish family, or at least, that's the name left behind in broken hymns and half-legible letters. But most don't say it aloud. Not because of fear. Because the moment you do, you begin to forget something important. Your birthday. Your mother's voice. Your reason for walking into the room. The Elishes don't haunt. They harvest. They are known by those who study lost families as the remembered unmade, not ghosts, not demons, not witches, but a bloodline so deeply buried in the folds of history that the only thing keeping them alive is the act of forgetting they were ever real. Their curse began with an oath, made not to a god, but to a concept. In 1710, when fire devoured 3 counties in the northeast, only one building remained untouched, the Elish homestead. Not a scorch mark. Not a singe. The locals called it a miracle. But the Elishes called it a return. A ledger was found in the ashes of the neighboring church. Blackened, but readable. It listed a single phrase next to every lost parishioner, remembered too clearly. Because the Elish curse fed on memory. The more you recalled them, the more you disappeared. And the house grew stronger. One woman, a teacher named Leona Grist, attempted to write a paper exposing the Bloodlines mythos. She collected records, stories, even sketches from patients who claimed to see the house in dreams. The night before her presentation, she was found pacing a hotel hallway, weeping, repeating the same line, "I left someone behind, but I don't know who. I left someone behind, but I don't know who." She vanished a week later. Her laptop was found empty. But one folder remained, titled, "Do not name them," inside. One photo. A dark hallway. And in the center, a girl with no face. Not blurred. Not hidden. Erased. The Elishes don't claim land. They claim space in the mind. And when enough people forget the same truth, it rewrites the present. So if you've forgotten where your keys are, if you can't recall the last 5 minutes, if you've ever walked into a room and felt watched but remembered nothing, they may have already passed through you. And taken something you'll never know you lost. There are names so old, they no longer speak to the world, they command it. In a dying fold of land known as Duskwater Cross, where roads rot faster than wood and even light loses direction, there once lived a family that no one could fully name. They were known only by their initials, LSV. No first names. No lineage. Just 3 letters carved into stone, stitched into linens, and engraved on every page of a book that no one remembers writing. The LSV family didn't live in a house. They lived in a vow. A vow taken so long ago, so deeply inscribed into human inheritance, that to say their name in full was to wake something old. Something unfinished. Something listening. Every generation of the LSV line was born with no voice for the first 7 years. And then, suddenly, always suddenly, they would speak. Not words. Not sentences. Commandments. Orders that rewrote things. One child, Sorrel LSV, once pointed to a fox on the edge of the orchard and whispered, "Forget you were ever warm." That night, frost killed every tree in the region. And the fox was found days later, frozen upright, facing the house. But no one punished the children. Because the family didn't believe in punishment. They believed in balance. It was said the LSV bloodline had once bound an ancient utterance, a primal word so powerful that it created silence where it was spoken. And ever since, their family carried its pieces, splintered into syllables, buried in their names. One great-aunt, known only as Leora SV, never opened her mouth after age 12. But every night, her room glowed faintly with light from nowhere. Letters would appear on her walls. Names no one had heard, but all felt. Children born with those names often never died. They lingered. Aged. But never fell fully into death. A priest once tried to exorcise the house. He lasted 2 hours. Left blind in one eye. And when asked what he saw, he said only, "They don't speak in words. They speak in roots. In names that remember themselves." In the town square of Duskwater Cross stands a statue with no face. Just 3 letters on its base, LSV. People avoid it. Birds don't perch on it. And if you stand too close, you'll hear your name, backward. And you'll feel it leaving you. Some families don't pass away, they loop, endlessly, dragging time and strangers with them. In the silent, overgrown village of Ravel's Rest, there stands a crumbling manor known only as the Looping House. Not because of its hallways or design, but because of what happens inside it. Time resets. The family who built it, the Kestelborns, vanished from census records in 1879, but neighbors claim they never left. Because every so often, the same candle lights itself in the highest window. Every October 12th, the same child's laugh echoes across the pond. And every winter, the same boot prints appear in the same mud trail, leading nowhere. It's always the same. The same sequence. The same tragedy. A wedding. A storm. A missing bride. And a family who waits, year after year, as if they don't know it already happened. Historians called it an emotional anomaly. Locals call it the family that forgets their dead. But there's more. Those who enter the looping house, even accidentally, begin to remember things they never lived. A woman from out of state entered the property while hiking and came out weeping, whispering the name Devoria as if it was her mother's. She had no idea where it came from. But Evoria Kestelborn was the name of the bride. The one who vanished. The one who reappears every 33 years, seen walking into the lake at dawn. And each time she does, someone nearby drowns. Not in water. But in memory. Their mind collapses inward. Not insanity. Displacement. They begin writing in journals they don't remember owning. Signing letters with names from old gravestones. Children humming songs last heard before the Civil War. Grandmothers dreaming of weddings in languages that no longer exist. The Kestelborn bloodline has become a ritual event. A psychic loop that doesn't just trap its own, it infects others. Makes them characters in a drama they didn't agree to star in. Theories suggest the Kestelborns made a deal, not for immortality, but for preservation. A wish to never let grief finish. So time obliged. It froze the moment of loss, and played it forever. A curse, born of refusal. So if you ever find yourself near Ravel's Rest, and hear a woman singing at sunrise, don't look at the lake. Because if you do, you might remember being part of the family. And worse, they might remember you. Some families lose their names through shame. Others through time. But one family sold it. Willingly. And the thing that bought it still walks the halls they built. In the blackened pines beyond Low Chasm Hollow, beyond the last broken mile marker, there stands a house with no mailbox, no records, and no name. Not because it was forgotten, but because the family that lived there gave it up. They were called the Unnamed. But before the trade, they bore a name so powerful, it was said to make ravens fall silent and rain fall backward. A name that should not be spoken under an open sky. It was sold in 1822. Why? To spare a child. The family's firstborn daughter was born without a heartbeat. Still, but not cold. They buried her under moonlight, but the soil stayed soft, the grass refused to grow, and each night the sound of an infant crying echoed through the orchard, though no child lay above ground. On the 13th night, something knocked at the cellar door. Not loudly. Just once. The father answered. He was never seen again. But the daughter returned, alive. Eyes open. Smiling. And never aging. The price? Their name. Erased from every deed, record, gravestone, and family Bible. And with that erasure came a gift, or a curse, they were now unkillable. Not immortal. Unkillable. They could age. Bleed. Drown. But they would always wake again, a little less whole, a little less themselves. Their features shifted subtly over time, as if memory alone held them together. But memory fades. By 1904, only one family member still lived in the house. Or perhaps it was all of them, in a single body. A woman whose face changed seasonally. Who answered to no name, and spoke in plural. Locals whispered that when she looked at you, you felt seen from behind your own eyes. That when she laughed, it echoed before she opened her mouth. Visitors who tried to learn the family's true name met strange fates. One man's tongue turned to salt. Another forgot how to spell his own. A third carved the wrong name into his own chest, a name in a language older than the alphabet. On the fence post of the property sits a single plaque. The metal never rusts. The words change every year, but they always end the same, we gave it freely. Now we belong to something else. And it knows how to spell us. So if you ever feel you've forgotten something essential, your purpose, your name, your place, ask yourself this: did you give it away? Or did something come and take it? Some families aren't born. They're not made. They're called. In a crater-shaped valley between the Devil's Fork and the Hollow of Crows, there stands a house made entirely of black stone, older than any quarry in the region. No foundation. No blueprints. Just a single stair leading underground, into darkness that never lifts. Locals call it the mouth. Because it does not open. It waits. And from within it came the Verrick family. Not through childbirth. Not through legacy. But through summoning. They were conjured by 12 voices speaking in perfect unity, voices belonging to a long-dead congregation that once worshipped a forgotten god called the Bound One. The god had no face. Only a chain of names. And it was said that when all those names were spoken in the correct order, a family would appear. Not like a family. But as the embodiment of what binds all families: secrecy, blood, obligation, and the weight of unchosen love. And so the Verricks emerged, not as infants, but fully grown. Already dressed in mourning black, already fluent in dozens of dead languages, already bearing memories of lives that hadn't yet occurred. The mother was called Morel. The father, Ashroth. The children, 3 of them, were never seen apart. And never still. Always pacing. Always circling. Like they were waiting for the next line in a ritual not yet spoken. Those who dared visit the mouth claimed strange sensations, feeling their own heartbeat grow slower as they approached. Hearing their mother's voice, even if she'd been dead for years. Seeing their reflection move a moment out of sync. One man who trespassed left behind a journal page with a single line repeated 27 times: "They aren't alive. They are the echo of a prayer gone wrong." The Verricks never harmed anyone. But people left changed. Eyes duller. Memories reversed. One woman swore she had a son before visiting, but after leaving, her body bore no signs of childbirth. Her house remained filled with children's toys. Her walls with photographs of a boy who no longer existed. The Verrick bloodline is not a curse. It's a spell. Ongoing. Incomplete. And every time someone remembers their name, the next line in the summoning is whispered again, pulling them further into existence. So ask yourself. Have you heard of them before? Does their name feel familiar? If yes, then you may have already spoken part of the summoning. And the mouth may be waiting. There are families made of blood. Of vows. Of land. But this one is made entirely of a voice. A voice that never dies. Only finds new mouths. At the edge of the Appalachian quiet, where maps blur and rivers double back like veins, there is no house. No grave. No fence. Only a clearing where nothing grows, and a single rusted phonograph that plays even when unplugged. It repeats the same sound, not music. Not speech. Just a woman's voice, saying a single sentence in a dialect no scholar has been able to trace: "We will not fall silent until we finish what was whispered." That voice? It is all that remains of the Murnane family. Or so people thought. The Murnanes weren't known for power, land, or legacy. They were known for listening. For centuries, each generation was born with no voice of their own. Mute. Wordless. But not silent. Because at night, they would speak. Not with intention, but as vessels. Mouths opening as if pulled by string. Eyes closed. Throats taut with borrowed syllables. The oldest records come from 1761, when a child named Tomlin Murnane recited, word for word, the details of a massacre that hadn't yet happened. 3 weeks later, the event unfolded. Exactly as he described. He never spoke again. But at night, he would hum. Low. Crooked. Prophetic. The Murnane bloodline, it said, carried a voice older than language itself. A remnant of something silenced at the dawn of civilization, a truth so dangerous that it was buried in flesh, passed from generation to generation, waiting for the world to deserve it. But the world never did. And so the voice changed tactics. It left the family, split itself like a virus, and began entering anyone who listened too closely. One radio host in 1949 claimed to pick up a signal that repeated names he'd never heard, but that made his teeth ache to hear. He broadcast it once. By morning, every one of his listeners had the same dream, a woman standing in a field. Face hidden by hair. Mouth moving, but the sound came from behind their ears. They spoke the words in their sleep. All of them. The exact same phrase. We are the family beneath the breath. The whisper that outlives the lungs. The Murnane voice now lives in recordings. In static. In moments when you hear your name in an empty room, but no one called you. It isn't trying to be heard. It's trying to finish its sentence. And once it does, there may be no silence left. Because when the final word is spoken, the one that ties all these families together, the door opens. And what steps through won't need a name, a face, or even a body. It will just need you.